Therapists of Reddit, what was your biggest "I know I'm not supposed to judge you but holy SHT moment"? Once had a patient whose wife shook their baby to death. He wanted help reconnecting with his wife. At the time I was a young father of a newborn myself, and he triggered a lot of fear in me for my own child, a deep loathing of his spouse, and pity, the how pathetic kind, for the patient. I tried for 3 sessions, met his spouse and everything before handing the case over to my supervisor, who knew about my initial reactions, and tried to help me through it. Unfortunately, it ended up being more about my feelings than his, and I was new to the profession at the time. These things are expected to crop up from time to time, but I was still taken aback by my own reactions. I work at a residential group home. We had a kid who we had admitted about 4 months prior, when in a family session they mentioned they had parasites. I'm like, what? Mom goes, oh yeah, our whole family has them. We don't believe in getting rid of them since they're part of our biological ecosystem, and I'm just dumbstruck. We spent 3 weeks afterwards convincing this family it was an infectious disease, concerns as other residents have fecal eating behaviors and various other unsanitary issues that could cause a unit spread. 3 weeks of education, planning, and worst of all convincing this kid and mother that their IQ wouldn't drop because they had agreed to irradiate the parasites. Lots of CBT work, but Jesus, it took way longer than any of my team expected. I work with kiddos who have experienced some kind of abuse/trauma. 90% of my clients have been sexually abused. I have a lot of holy shit moments, but not from judgment of my clients but from what happened to them. I've had clients whose father made them help him dismember mom's body after dad murdered her in front of them. I've had clients under the age of 8 who have been sex trafficked. I've had clients who have been forced to film torture porn. I have holy shit moments all the time. I was once in my psychiatrist's office, a bi-monthly, 15 minutes med check. She asked me what was going on, more as conversation. I told her that in the last 6 weeks, my 3 elders, aunt and 2 uncles, I was guardian/conservator for, had died, one right after the other. My wife had a heart attack. My daughter attempted suicide. And my mom broke her hip and had laid on her floor for a week before being found. She drank and ate from the dog's bowls. I got that call within 10 minutes of setting up the last funeral. She stopped the meeting, got on the phone with a therapist in the office next to her and had her postpone her next meeting to speak with me. I was so fucked up, I had no idea. I think she saved my life. I feel like a lot of the comments saying that they never judge their clients might be working in voluntary services, or they've been very fortunate in their client base. Judgment isn't an inherently bad thing. It's how we know that murdering people is wrong. So when a convicted pedophile client told me, "Nothing gets me going like a pair of little girls' worn panties," you better believe I judged the fuck out of him. I continued to work with him and I treated him with compassion and respect because he's a human being worthy of both. I did my job because I'm a professional. But I can't honestly say that I didn't judge him. I judged that he should never be around children. I judged that he is not yet ready for change. I judged that his access to his own daughter should be closely supervised. That's a lot of judgments. Understanding your own inherent biases and how they influence your work is a very important part of training and practice. Here's my most recent one. As the pandemic worsened here in the US and more lockdowns are on their way, one of my most extroverted clients and I brainstormed ways to meet her social needs while remaining safe. The following week she canceled her session and told me that she's positive for COVID after attending an orgy, which definitely wasn't one of our ideas. I let out the deepest, most defeated sigh after I hung up the phone. Lots of people discussing pedophilia as an example of the toughest stuff to not judge despite our training. I haven't yet treated a pedophile, thankfully. At least not an identified one. I did run a men's anger management group though, and some of those men had done some terrible things to women. Most of them I found ways to like and admire for their positive aspects, but there were 2 guys in that group I just could never find unconditional positive regard for. One guy basically never spoke in group. He would give one-word answers and occasionally just discuss how unfair the system was to him. I worked really hard to open him up and find things to connect over, but he never opened up to me or the group. He left the group after he strangled his girlfriend and went to jail. She survived, thankfully. The other left group early routinely, showed up late, participated minimally and similarly never wanted to open up honestly. He left early one group after we had discussed him staying to the end and threatened me when I told him he wasn't going to get credit for attendance, something the court required. Oddly, I eventually moved into the apartment below him, completely without knowledge, and listened to him scream at his girlfriend and break shit while I called the cops. I judge these men. They're shitty. Maybe they're redeemable, But redemption requires self-exploration and they both refuse to do so. It's worth noting how differently I felt about them than so many others in the group, men I found ways to help and admire and respect even in spite of their awful behavior in the past. I joined in a review of a secluded patient and he threw a cup of wee and poo in my face when we opened the door. I tried to be objective about his experience but I just thought, what a cunt. I work in inpatient services so it can be hard to challenge myself at times. Individuals with diagnosis of personality disorder, for example, can do things that in isolation make you think they're just being bratty or manipulative, but to think of the experiences that shaped them to react like that in a given situation can help to clear my judgment and find compassion. Harder when someone bites me or hits me with one of our fabulously detachable anti-ligature curtain poles, though. It's not often I get to talk about my profession, but here goes. I was working at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center and had a client come in who was a self-proclaimed drug lord. As we worked together, he told me about his history. Included in this history was how he got to where he was currently at. During the conversation, this man admitted to selling his sister into sex slavery, forcibly injecting her with several sedatives and narcotics, and having several people teach her a lesson. What this meant, he never shared. He told this story with a blank face, smiling only when he recalled the good times, which he referred to as times when he had enough heroin to get through the day. I'm not sure where he is at now, but this man inspired me to work with victims of sex trafficking, because not only do they deal with the stigma of selling their bodies, they often manage drug addictions. People would honestly be floored if they realized how many people were addicted to chemicals that they were forcibly given. I work with youth and adolescents who have anxiety, trauma, and/or depression. Some of the kids I worked with had some pretty severe attachment issues. Regardless of this, I never thought I'd have to seriously explain. You can't just buy a straitjacket for your kid. Feeding your kid ultra-spicy ramen each night instead of the meal everyone else is eating isn't specifically defined as abuse, but you have to understand the emotional abuse that this causes. Your kid isn't trying to kill you because they stand in your doorway at night crying. That's likely because they're scared of their traumatic nightmares, but feel like you will just yell at them if they wake you up. Clinical psychologist working primarily in forensics here. This means my clients are usually involved in legal proceedings, family court, juvenile court, criminal court, etc. My job is usually to evaluate or provide treatment. I'm not there to judge, that's the judge's job, but of course I have my thoughts. I am usually impressed by the justifications people make for shitty behavior. The one that irks me the most is when parents manipulate their child against the other parent. I've had to do therapy for a 5-year who said she doesn't want to see a parent because they haven't paid child support. Excuse me? What 5-year knows, understand, or needs to be worried about child support? Opposite side, if that's accepted too? I was assigned to see the lead psychologist of the local hospital as I was severely depressed and had become suicidal. She literally rolled her eyes at me, told me to grow up and said she could be having appointments with people who were actually about to kill themselves, not me who was already working with the team. This sent me absolutely spinning, bottling everything up, thinking I didn't deserve help and ended up in hospital 2 years later after an attempt. When they looked at my records, the hospital suddenly became very interested in any psychological experts I'd previously spoken to, informed them of the above incident. They asked if I knew the name and I said I didn't, but they had a strong accent. They immediately looked like they were about to burst out crying, apologized excessively, then informed me they had been fired a year ago. You mentioned you're getting ready to start therapy. I know we're different, but therapy was one of the best decisions I ever made for myself. It's good to have a neutral third party weigh in on what troubles you. And remember, you don't have to stay with a therapist if you don't want. Therapy, like any psychological treatment, is often more about trial and error to find what works for the individual than anything. Also, you'll get out of it what you put in, so be upfront, frank and honest with your therapist. That will help them work with you on determining the best therapy course for you. I wish you the best of luck. When I was underage, I got caught with a drink on Bourbon Street and got a minor in possession. I was telling my therapist about it, and said that the police caught me with a hand grenade in New Orleans. He didn't realize that a hand grenade was a type of drink, and it was funny to watch him try to process that his patient might have just casually told him that he had been caught with a fragmentation grenade. He took a big long pause, and said, "Where did you even find a grenade?" I realized the misunderstanding quickly and corrected him. But for a moment he definitely was thinking, holy shit, how do I deal with this? I work in mental health and have worked in acute and crisis settings for the majority of my career. The most notable event I experienced was when a young person had presented with significant ongoing suicidal ideation who was dealing with a lot of shit. I spent a lot of time with them, mostly de-escalation and working out what the plan should be moving forward. One of their parents came in a little while later and I had the opportunity to speak to them about where their child was and what had been going on, with their consent of course. Midway through me trying to explain some of the psychological constructs and ways the parent could help, they said to me, "Is this going to take much longer? I have a show to go and watch." All I can say is, I never judge my patients, I have never walked their path or viewed the world through their eyes. But the people around them who perpetuate the suffering of the people I work with through ignorance, malice and selfishness, I judge them. To piggyback on what others have said, it is highly unlikely for me to have moments where I judge my clients. It happens sometimes, but I'm able to shut down those thoughts quickly in my head and return to being present for the people I see. People are so incredibly complex that my judgment wouldn't have any meaning anyway, and it doesn't have a place in our work together. I will admit though, something that does get me feeling a little salty is when I have a client's parent that attempts to sabotage the therapeutic relationship I have with their child, or pulling them out of therapy entirely when some of the things we talk about challenges some potentially unhealthy family dynamics. I don't feel anger toward the parents, mostly I feel bad for the kid. Patient side here. I had been seeing a therapist for a few months to help with chronic depression and self-harm with some pretty intense suicidal ideation. I had tried Suprex in the past, didn't like the side effects and put it down, but I was ready to try something new to supplement therapy. Everyone within earshot was calling Wellbutrin a miracle and lifesaver, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Since my therapist couldn't prescribe drugs, I got an appointment with a psychiatrist. My first appointment, I explain what I've got going on, what I'm doing to work on it, and what I'm looking for in seeing him. I do a pretty good job holding myself together in public. I dress myself, I hold down jobs. At that point I lived on my own, now living with my partner. All in all, I've got a well-polished mask. I guess it's too good, because pretty early in our session he looked at me and said, "I don't think you're depressed." Bro. This is the first time we met, I've been here for 20 minutes, and you're ready to reverse my diagnosis? Cool bro. During my training I was asked how would you feel if a client were to come to you and admitted they were a pedophile that was on the edge of committing seriously horrific acts? Could you see that person as another human being that needed help, or were your personal feelings about the abhorrent behavior too strong? This factor leads some people to not continue my course onto the next level, but it really illustrates the level of non-judgment needed in this field. We all have our own personal feelings, of course, but these get talked about in supervision. Not a judgment. You kind of train your brain not to judge, because you are seeking to understand and help. When you do those things, you can't simultaneously judge. We could all use a little more of that in real life, I suppose. I'll share this though. I do feel concerned about this recent phenomenon of young people I worked with self-diagnosing, sharing, and identifying very closely with mental illness, as if the pendulum quickly swung from never, ever share your feelings to OMG, you're depressed? All of us are too. Life's challenges can be tough and they don't need a scientific-sounding label to be valid and real. You are not your diagnosis. We can find validation and support in healthier ways. I'm a dude. I was brutally raped multiple times between the ages of 7 and 10. My one and only attempt to try to get help from a therapist was one of the most awful experiences of my life. I attempted to get help in my early 20s. Upon first going in I was asked what had happened to me, after explaining a basic outline of the abuse. I could already see that she was very dismissive and seemed not to really believe me. She then asked about my relationship status. At the time I was in a long-term relationship with a woman who had 2 kids, boys. Upon finding this out she immediately demanded the names and address of my girlfriend, names of the kids, and said she would be immediately getting in touch with social services to ensure that I wasn't abusing them. I can't put into words just how much that destroyed me mentally, that she could obviously see something in me that I couldn't see. That somehow she was certain that I would be an abuser. I started to cry. She told me to pull myself together. I also can't put into words the pathological visceral hatred I have for pedophiles and rapists. If I could get away with murdering them I would. I would never ever inflict the absolute nightmare I went through on any child. I got up and left. I came very close to the edge of suicide that day. I also immediately ended the relationship because I couldn't deal with the thought that the kids might be at risk because of me. It's now 21 years later and I'm tearing up typing this. Because of that experience I have never sought therapist help again. I survived mentally, but it's not good survival. Okay, real therapist here. I got one. Some of my clients are shockingly bad at giving themselves credit, holy shit. Like they might get a nearly straight A GPA and a brutal major while battling depression, or overcome years of phobia and get behind the wheel again, or write a literal novel, or raise a kid as a single parent with low income, or build new relationships after being burned, or cope with OCD well enough to hold down a job. And they'll talk about themselves as if everyone on earth is better than them, as if their accomplishments are worthless. And I know it's because of depression or anxiety or another condition, but I'm often stunned by how differently I see them compared to how they see themselves.